Okay. All right, my friends. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rabbi Jeff Goldwasser from here at Temple Sinai. There's going to be a little parade of introductions, a little line as we're moving along for introductions. But I want to welcome you to Temple Sinai, also on behalf of the Temple Sinai Sisterhood, which is also a co-sponsor of today's event. We're very pleased to invite the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel and Dr. Andrew Pessin for a talk about anti-Semitism on college campuses. So I am introducing the next introducer.
Yes,
We'll try to move it along to the main event and not repeat what Rabbi Jeff had to say. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kirk Jordan. My wife, Ellen, here she is, and I are members of Temple Sinai. I also serve on the board of the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel, known as Ricky. So on behalf of Ricky, thank you very much for joining us. We are so grateful to Rabbi Jeff and Temple Sinai for hosting this event and for their really invaluable support as a community partner. We've done an event before and we very much appreciate it. I want to extend a special thanks to Temple Sinai Sisterhood, specifically President Ellen Rappaport, who I don't think could join us today, for co-sponsoring and for providing the refreshments, which we'll enjoy at the conclusion of the presentation. So I joined Ricky about 2 years ago because I believe deeply in our mission to combat anti-Semitism and strengthen the relationship with Israel. Working alongside such dedicated Zionists has been incredibly rewarding to me. One of the most tireless and passionate is our executive director, Maria Friedman. And I'd like to ask Maria to come up, share a few words about Ricky, and then introduce Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt, and thank you everyone for being here. As Kurt said, my name is Maria Friedman, and I'm the Executive Director of Rhode Island Coalition for Israel. We call ourselves RICKI for short, that's our acronym. And if you aren't already familiar with us, our mission is to combat anti-Semitism, or as we call it, Jew hatred, educate about Israel, and strengthen the alliance between the U.S. and Israel. So I'm very, very pleased that we have Andrew Pessin here today, who's an expert on anti-Semitism, talking about specifically anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campuses. Before I turn it over to him, I did just want to plug a couple upcoming events that we have going on.
When you have people who make up against you.
Sorry, let me see if I
Look
can.
at the meaning in Farsi.
Okay, I just moved that. Sorry about that. That's what I see. Still waiting to
Now here comes the expert.
yeah.
I turn the volume all the way down. Maybe can that be done?
Sure. Okay.
Hey, friends on Zoom.
I think I just
You got it?
I muted
Okay.
everybody, hopefully. Sorry about that. So I did want to plug actually tomorrow specifically at Brown University's medical school. They are putting on a very harmful anti-Semitic, anti-Israel event. It's actually hosted by the Brown Medical School and the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at Brown, which got reinstated recently. So we will be having a peaceful rally, a peaceful presence, as we call it, outside of the medical school, which is at Richmond Street. Again, you can find more details at the refreshment table, but we do welcome you to join us. We will provide signs and flags. We will be outside of the event. And again, our goal is just to raise awareness about these harmful lies that different groups on campuses perpetuate, which you'll hear more about in Dr. Pessin's talk. And then the title, it's like a conversation about healthcare in Gaza, a conversation with Dr. Zayer Ahmad. Yeah, so, and there's some very anti-Semitic things already in the event description. And then also every year at Brown commencement or graduation ceremony, we also have a peaceful presence to show support to the Jewish students and their families. So you guys are all invited to come out with us on the 24th of this month. That's a Sunday of Memorial Weekend. We will be there during the procession and also the graduation ceremony with our Israeli and American flags. And we will also have an aerial banner floating overhead in the sky for everyone to see that says "Bound for Israel" with an Israeli and American flag. And again, that is our way to support Jewish students who lived through some of those pro-terror encampments that happened back in 2024. That was only a couple years ago. So the students graduating had to live through that. So you guys are invited to that. And then lastly, just wanted to mention that we also have another event at the end of this month on the 31st with Camera, which is a media watchdog company that monitors inaccuracies about Israel that are reported in the media. We're going to be talking about this media bias against Israel and how it manifests. And so you guys are all welcome to come to that event as well. That one will be at Temple Torah Israel. And again, more details and codes to register are on the slides there. So I will now have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Dr. Andrew Pessin, who's a professor of philosophy at Connecticut College, former campus bureau editor for the Allgemeiner, and founding director of the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism, which is so exciting because he is leading this movement to make this a field of study. He's also the author of many academic titles and books, as well as works of philosophy for a general audience. His recent books include Israel Breathes, World Condemns, 2 volumes, Refuting the Lies Told About Israel, Anti-Zionism on Campus, The University, Free Speech, and BDS, and Poisoning the Wells, Antisemitism in America. His articles address many aspects of the campus environment for Jews and for Israel supporters, including the question of whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The short answer is yes. He has also published 4 novels, including Nevergreen, an academic satire about campus cancel culture and its harmful effects on the Jews, which unfortunately proved prophetic after the October 7th massacre. His most recent novel, Bright College Years, is about how colleges used to be before they all went crazy. He enjoys the moments of fame portraying the genius on the former Late Show with David Letterman. For more information about his work, go to andrewpessin.com, and to learn more about his Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism, go to icmaz.org, and they call it icsa.substack.com. And so with that, I will turn it over to Andrew, who will do his presentation, and then we will take questions at the end. Thank you, everyone.
We want to go introduce because everyone's introducing the crowd. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Temple Sinai. Thank you, Sisterhood. Thank you, Ricky. Ricky does unbelievable work. Boots on the ground, I think, is such a fantastic tagline. Showing up, being present is so essential. I hope folks can make it tomorrow or to ground commencement or anytime Ricky is asking you to show up. We need to be present. I have lots to say, but 2 hours, is that what you gave me? I don't know. You know, professors, they pay us by the word, so I can go up indefinitely on almost any topic. But I don't know if you folks, are you able to see the screen? Maybe not adequately. Okay. All right. This is how to get in touch with me, how to follow me if you are interested after this talk. Featured there are, just this past year, I published a 2-volume collection of everything I've written since 2015. And I should tell you what I've been doing since 2015 very, very briefly. I was canceled 11 years ago, I would say, for being a Jew. On my campus, it was a very ugly affair. It went international. We were getting death threats from 43 different countries. It was fantastic. It was very, very scary and traumatic. But that was the moment that, for me anyway, I saw and understood that anti-Zionism, in a word, just is another form of Jew hate. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right? Campuses have been hostile to Israel, increasingly hostile to Israel for really at least a couple of decades, and starting even earlier if you'd like to trace it back further. And they insist on distinguishing the hostility to Israel, which they'll call anti-Zionism, from bigotry or prejudice against the Jews, which goes by the name anti-Semitism. But given the details of my affair, and then given the last 11 years since, as I've watched campuses very, very closely, it becomes unambiguously clear that the hostility to Israel is just a form of hostility to Jews, Jew hatred, if you like. And as I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. After 2015, terrible as it was, I had 2 choices: sort of crumple up and have a nervous breakdown, or stand up and fight back. And so happily, with the support of lots of people in this community and really across the world, I decided it was time to stand up. So I spent the last 11 years, I became campus bureau editor for the Allgemeiner, which is a wonderful news source. Anything Jewish, Israel related, you can get a free newsletter. Just go to allgemeiner.com, the hard G, allgemeiner.com, and sign up for the newsletter. Because step one of doing anything is being informed about what's going on and having a sense of what you need to do. So please do sign up for the Allgemeiner. I was campus bureau editor, so in that capacity for over 9 years, I scour the internet daily, hours at a time, to find out what's going on campuses. So I actually have this incredible database now of incidents from the last 11 years, and I'm still doing the incidents, not for the Allgemeiner anymore. So I've been documenting this stuff for the last 11 years, but because I am a philosopher and an academic, I'm really interested in the ideas and the ideology and the theories that are ultimately the problem. Right? There's a lot of Jew hatred on campus. The reason there's a lot of Jew hatred on campus is there's a set of ideologies that have become very popular, deeply entrenched, and those ideologies turn people into Jew haters. So I've both been documenting and analyzing this stuff for the last 11 years. So that's what you have in these books here. The volume one is the trajectory, documenting and analyzing how we got to the point where, and of course, this is the moment when many people sort of woke up to the problem. October 7th, or perhaps we should say October 8th, because what I'm focusing on is not the horrificness of that terrorist atrocity and massacre, but the campus response to it, which was, as anyone who's been following this news knows, not horror and condemnation, but celebration, endorsement, and calls for more. As I like to say, no, I don't like to say it, as I do say, that response didn't surprise me in the least, because I've been tracking this trajectory for the 8 years leading up to it, and it was just the next logical step in the trajectory. So it didn't surprise me in the least. It was still shocking and horrific to see it. Right? So volume one sort of documents and analyzes how we got to the point where when a jihadi eliminationist Jew-hating group slaughters, at the time we thought 1,400 people, mostly civilians, college kids and faculty celebrate, right? How do we get to that point? And then volume two is the aftermath, tracking what's gone on campuses since that day. So anyway, these will be available for sale if you're interested afterwards. So I want to tell you my goal today. I won't talk too much about specific campus incidents. When we get to the question and answer period, I'm happy to maybe address that. I want to talk about the key ideas. What are these ideologies that make people hate the Jews, that are so present and prominent on campuses? And if you sometimes feel like Jews in Israel are under attack from every direction, it's because we are, right? It's literally from the sky, from the sea, from the left, political left, from the right, every direction they're coming after us. And they, on the one hand, distinguish their reasons for coming after us. But what I'm going to try to suggest today is that really, in the end, they all boil down to the same reason. So that's what I'll be talking about today. And I will try to keep it to a reasonable time. So last year, I had the privilege of teaching a course called American Zionism and Anti-Zionism. And I had a very talented student in there. In fact, the most talented student there was an anti-Zionist student, as it turned out. But I had a good time. I can't speak for her. She actually didn't respond to the nice note I wrote her at the end of the semester, so maybe she didn't have as good a time as I had. But she was sharp, and we had lots of conversations throughout the semester as we went through various issues. And right towards the end, she asked really the hardest question. Almost wrong way, this way. There we go. She asked this question, and this is right at the end of the semester. And basically, throughout much of the semester, I'll read it in a second. We were arguing over this and that, and historical events, interpretation of those events, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the semester, she asked me the following, and this is nearly verbatim. She said, "But nearly everyone in the world agrees that Israel is guilty of many terrible things, like the allegations, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide. So many countries, so many UN reports, so many international courts, so many NGOs, so many experts, so many professors." And this is why I can't necessarily blame an individual college student for becoming anti-Israel, because if they think they're doing their due diligence and researching the issue, every direction they turn, they're going to get this information about how guilty Israel is, including many of their professors on campus this time. So she continued. what are the chances that you, meaning me, who deny these crimes are right and everybody else is wrong? Can the whole world be wrong? And you might have heard that expression before. She actually used that expression because, as you'll see, I think sort of delicious in a way. That is a truly difficult question, and it puts one. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it puts one in the difficult position of insisting this. This is a picture of a mass mob of people, and one person standing in front of them, facing them, saying, "You're all wrong," right? Hard position to be in here. One is perhaps reminded of Netanyahu's speech last fall at the UN General Assembly, when almost everybody walked out of the hall. Here, the mob shows its disagreement by vacating the premises, but the idea is the same. It's one man against the world. It takes incredible courage to be that person to stand up against the mob, or maybe incredible foolishness to think that you're smarter than everybody else. You've got it right, and they're all wrong. Kind of like this guy, if you can see this picture. It's a famous picture from the Nazi era, and it's a large audience. I think it's all men there, and they're all giving the Nazi salute. And there's one guy sitting there with his arms crossed, right? Like, probably was brought out in the back and shot afterwards. Wouldn't surprise me, but nevertheless, what courage or what foolishness it takes to be that person. Let me start by saying that this position is not at all unfamiliar to the Jews, who have a long history of being a very tiny minority, standing at odds with the beliefs and practices of the whole world around them. It might even be the quintessential Jewish condition. And indeed, one famous Jewish thinker already posed and grappled with the question phrased exactly that way, which is why I'm glad you said, can the whole world be wrong? It's a famous essay by Echad Ha'am. He was an early cultural Zionist, kind of a rival of Herzl back in those days. He wrote this essay in, it says there, I can't quite read that thing, 1892, called Some Consolation, where he basically concludes, but you ask, is it possible that everybody can be wrong and the Jews right? And he argues, yes, indeed. And what he's talking about in this particular essay is the famous blood libel, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This goes back to the Middle Ages, when rumors started spreading that Jews used the blood of Gentile children for ritual purposes, like baking into the matzah, etc. And it invariably was the trigger to mass violence against Jews. There have been hundreds of pogroms over the centuries that were triggered by Jews are murdering our children and using their blood. So that's called the blood libel, because as Echad Ha'am argues, maybe not the whole world, but for centuries, lots and lots of people believe the Jews killed Gentile children to use blood for ritual purposes. And we know we don't, right? The whole world can be wrong. We know better, at least in this case. And indeed, this phenomenon, can the whole world be wrong, this continues to be relevant to this day, to the point where a scholar named Richard Landis, who some of you are familiar with, wrote a book a few years ago called Can the Whole World Be Wrong? Lethal Journalism, Antisemitism, and Global Jihad. I had the privilege of reviewing this book for a journal, and I gave it the best title of any review I've ever written anyway, which was, this is the book that saw October 7th coming from a mile away. Richard Landis was 20 years ago arguing that what too many people in the West, and this will sound very familiar now, too many people in the West think of as the importance of extending tolerance and enforcing or endorsing diversity as really I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. That what many people characterize as a social justice movement is in fact the front wave of an Islamic jihad against the West. That was Richard Landis for 20 years, at least, arguing this. And October 7th sort of made that clear to many, many people. So I will be joining the fine tradition of Echad Ha'am and Richard Landis and beginning to explain precisely why, indeed, the whole world can be wrong, is wrong, and we, meaning I and you, and that frighteningly small number of Zionists in the world compared to the global population, are right. This presentation is based on a longer article I published last year on my Substack. So if you want, you can check it out and read it in great detail with footnotes and things like that. I'll skip the footnotes here. I should also mention that I'll come to this at the end, as Maria mentioned. I've launched the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. So if you're interested in finding out more about that and getting involved, I have a pad here. I want to take your email address at the end. So maybe between all of us, we'll remember at the end to do that. Okay, so strap on your seatbelts and let's go. It's the first AI image I ever created there, so it's very proud of that one. I'm guessing many of you are aware of this book. This is the most famous anti-Semitic book, people like to call it, ever. It's certainly the most influential anti-Semitic book ever. And I would actually argue it's the most influential book of the 20th century, more than the Bible even, right? So that's how important this book is. It's called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or different learned elders of Zion, you'll sometimes see. This book appeared in the early 1900s. And then was adopted and disseminated by the true A-team of international Jew haters, Russia and the Soviet Union, the Nazis, the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, and so on. It is a forgery, a very famous forgery. It purports to be the secret minutes of a meeting that was held behind the scenes of the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland in 1897, where the elders of Zion come together and plot their campaign to take over the world. So a couple of things to note. Several things to note. First of all, it's not only the most anti-Semitic text ever written, it's a fundamentally anti-Zionist text. It's set at the first Zionist Congress because in their eyes, as we will see, Zionism is part of the Jewish plot to take over the world. And then second, it's important to note that there are no such thing as the elders, or at least they've never gotten in touch with me. And this meeting never happened. The whole thing is a fake. It's a forgery, etc. Although that fact was widely known from at least 1921 onwards, there was a whole newspaper expose about how the book is actually plagiarized from an earlier 19th century philosophical book that had nothing to do with the Jews. And you can see all the passages that were just cut and pasted, right? So the book is a forgery. And by 1921, anyone who cared about the truth knew that it was a forgery. But that didn't stop the book from spreading around the world, and I mean the entire world, and directly inspiring Hitler's genocidal final solution, Hamas's jihadist final solution, and the long ongoing campaign of Russian Soviet anti-Zionism, which sounds nice when you call it anti-Zionism, but is in fact a long campaign to remove the Jews from the earth. And so what is it about this book that has inspired such unbelievably enormous behavior? It mentions, as I said, or it reveals to the world the great conspiracy that the dastardly Jews have to control the world, to subjugate and destroy all the non-Jews in the world. And it explains in great detail exactly how the Jews are going to do that. That's what the protocols are, the procedures. What are they going to do? And all of these are familiar anti-Semitic tropes. They're going to control the banks. They're going to control the press. They're going to control government. They're going to cause wars. They're going to cause instability. They're going to be communists and destroy the social order. They're going to be capitalists and gain wealth and power. All the things you're familiar with, they're all in this book. And when faced with this dastardly evil doing, who wouldn't respond by trying to annihilate the threat, right? If you believe this book, it's terrifying and it inspires, therefore, Nazis onward to annihilate the Jews. And indeed, this was the Nazi language, right? We're defending ourselves against the Jews. We're not the aggressors here. We're not evil people. The Jews are planning to take over the world. They're going to begin by coming after us Germans, so we have to defend ourselves. So that's how they portrayed it, which, by the way, if that sounds familiar, when you think of the Palestinian movement, in particular Hamas, saying that what they're doing is resistance, you're the aggressor. We're just defending ourselves. But notice how this works, the logic of this works. You make up this whole story that Jews plan to take over the world, and then you defend yourselves from that plot that doesn't exist. Right? It's all delusional nonsense, which is why all rational, clear-headed, decent people recognize in this book the protocols, not the documentation of a conspiracy, but what we call today a conspiracy theory, which has negative connotations, right? One that's deliberately designed to justify and incentivize hate and violence against the Jews. The irony, painful irony, is that with all the scholarly attention paid to the protocols, it has been studied quite a bit. Not actually enough, I believe, but attention has been paid to it. This book, by the way, is believed to this day by probably hundreds of millions of people on Earth to be true. So all over the Middle East, you can buy in any sort of Middle East bookstore, and they don't say it's a forgery. They think that it's true. It is quoted and cited in Hamas's foundational charter in 1988, right? They say, here's why we have to go against the Jews. Look at all the things they're doing. They literally cite the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So as we speak, probably hundreds of millions of people in the world still believe that the Jews are up to this. So with all the attention that's paid to the protocols, It obscures the increasingly apparent fact that there actually does exist a global conspiracy, a real conspiracy, but in the exactly opposite direction. Sometimes working together, sometimes working in parallel, sometimes centrally directed, sometimes dispersed, sometimes secretly, sometimes very much out in the open. Collectively, there is an enormous body of individuals, organizations, and even governments who have all been working towards the same inglorious end for over a century now. It's not that the Jews, the dastardly Jews, are conspiring to subjugate and eliminate the peoples of the world. It's that the peoples of the world, or at least enormously large constituents thereof, are actively conspiring to subjugate and in all too many cases to outright eliminate the Jews, roughly the whole world. So can the whole world be wrong? Yes, when there's a global conspiracy against the Jews, which is what I'm about to try to convince you of in the hour and a half I've left. It's a joke. All right, so what I'm going to do is go sort of quickly through the major players in this conspiracy, and this list will necessarily not be complete, but it will give you a sense of what we're dealing with here. So I call these major players the elders of anti-Zion. I think it's a very clever title, and the book that I'm writing might well have that title, right? The Protocols of the Elders of Anti-Zion, because what we're going to do is, if we had more time, I can go on fairly indefinitely, as I mentioned, but not only lay out the major players, it can lay out their protocols. Here's the things they do to advance this conspiracy. So if we have time, I'll go through one or two, perhaps. So we start with pre-Soviet Russia. Though the underlying Jew hatred goes back millennia, right? Jew hatred has been a major thing, at least since Christianity, the beginning of Christianity. Ground zero for the modern conspiracy that we're talking about, 20th century and onwards, is pre-Soviet Russia itself, whose rampant, pervasive, and often violent anti-Semitism produced the original conspiracy theory protocols in the first place, and in so doing, launched this conspiracy against the Jews. We might call the mysterious, unknown forgers of the protocols the original elders of anti-Zion. If you want, I can tell you a little bit more about how this book came into being. It was almost certainly commissioned by the Tsar's secret police, and it was part of a campaign. There was a lot of political unrest, and to divert attention from the Tsar and all of his malfeasance, they started to blame the Jews. So they put together this book so that the people would have pogroms against the Jews instead of against the Tsar. So this is the starting point of this. So roughly 1903 is the first version of this appeared. Suffice to say that 19th century Russian anti-Semitism is brutal and horrific. From the 1880s on, between 1880s into the early 1920s, there were something like 1,000 pogroms in the Pale of Settlement, which was the region of Russia that Jews were restricted to. 1,000 pogroms, and estimates are 200,000 to 300,000 Jews were murdered in that period. So Jews are being slaughtered in pre-Soviet Russia here, which, by the way, also is the major impetus for the Zionist movement, because the Jews need to get out. They're fleeing literally pogroms, miniature holocausts. The reason, by the way, you don't hear about this large-scale murder is because then the Holocaust came after it, and it sort of obscured that, right? The 6 million. But before the Holocaust, this was massive. Hundreds of thousands of Jews murdered here. The degree to which I'll go wrong way. Now I lost the scene. Again, I think I can go back to it. Okay, wrong direction. There we go. The Nazis and the satellites of the Nazis. We could have, by the way, a whole lecture on each one of these, just on the Russians, on the Nazis. So I'll be zipping through. But let me tell you a few things about the Nazis that you might not have known. The degree to which the protocols influenced Hitler and the Nazis is just stunning. And this is what I mean when I say it's the most influential book of the 20th century. Hitler reportedly had it on his bedside table, reportedly had memorized the book. This is according to Goebbels, who some of you are familiar with Goebbels, what? Nazi propaganda chief. So in Hitler's mind, this is what is motivating Hitler, right? The threat that the Jews were going to take over and conquer the world, and so Germany had to defend itself against the Jews, and so it was necessary to destroy the Jews. Well, logic is actually pretty sound, right? Like, these people are coming after us, and if you look at the language that they talk about in everything that they write and in their radio reports, it's them or us. If we don't get them, they're going to get us. They really believe the Jews wanted to annihilate them. And indeed, Hitler, it was required reading for Hitler Youth. It was distributed all over the country. The Nazis, as some of you will know, I think we'll talk a little bit about this in a few minutes, but the Nazis were closely allied with the Arabs during the 1930s and the 1940s. They wanted those alliances. And of course, they had something in common with the Arabs. They both wanted to eliminate the Jews. The Nazis made Arab translations of the protocols and distributed it in the Arab countries, right? So that's how the protocols made its way into the Arab world. Up to that point, the Arab world, there's a very, very long history. I mentioned Christian anti-Semitism. There's a very long history of Islamic anti-Semitism. So that pre-existed this, but basically in the Arab world, you had this deep hatred of the Jews going back to the 7th century since the founding of Islam. And then they poured on top of that the protocol sort of modern stuff. Not only are the Jews the greatest enemy of Islam since the 7th century, but they're now trying to take over the whole world. So this is what inflames the Arab world against Zionism and against the Jews. But that comes right out of the Nazis because they're distributing the protocols in Arab into the Arab world. So there's literally a straight line from the protocols to the Holocaust. It's shocking. Nor should we, nor should we overlook. If you didn't think you could hate professors anymore, this will do it for you, right? I as a professor, I hate, I mean, the professors are the problem. The professors are the problem. The faculty are the problem. The faculty are the ones that are developing the ideology that we're about to get into in a moment. And it begins at least with the Nazis. And so right after the war, Max Weinreich published this book called Hitler's Professors, where he documented the role that the scholars and the professors played in producing the ideas and the ideology and the theories that justify the Holocaust. You might have heard the phrase race science. They were very big on believing that there were important biological differences between the races. Jews were a mongrel race, which was the source of their depravity and evil, etc. And this was all science, right? Literally, they had institutes, scientific institutes to study the Jews, right? And so it was the professors that are churning out this stuff that basically entails Jews are subhuman, Jews are vermin, Jews have to be annihilated. So Nazi scholarship was directly involved in advancing this conspiracy against the Jews. As Hannah Arendt, famous 20th century figure, wrote in her review of this book, she said, quote, Dr. Weinreich is right to insist that Hitler showed one of his crucial insights into the nature of modern propaganda when he asked for scientific arguments and refused to use the standard crackpot ones of traditional anti-Semitic propaganda. End quote. The scare quotes around the word scientific are key. It's easy for decent people to reject obvious, crude, raw hatred, like that you might have in the pub or in the street or something like that. But dress it up in science and it all goes down far more easily. So we have here the professor is essentially dressing up in science this Jew hatred. And I'm using those phrases deliberately because if you study 21st century professors, they have a whole set of theories. You might have heard of critical race theory and post-colonial studies, and even disciplines like genocide studies, etc. They're all doing exactly the same thing. They are dressing up in academic theories what in the end comes out to justifying eliminating the Jews. So it goes back to, they're literally doing what the Nazis did. They're using newer theories now, but it's the same process. And of course, the Nazis conquered a lot of countries and influenced a lot of countries. So it's not just like Germany when we talk about the influence of the protocols. This spread to, and in many cases was welcomed perfectly happily to many of these surrounding countries. So we add the Nazis and their satellite countries into the mix. Before we move on to the next major player, I want to pause here on this passage from Hitler. This is from his famous book, Mein Kampf, that he wrote in the 1920s while in prison, where he lays out very clearly his views on everything, including the Jews, which is part of what made him so popular, because the people hated the Jews. This guy said, I hate the Jews, and I'm going to advance policies that will get rid of the Jews. So here he is talking about Zionism. In the 1920s, Zionism wasn't an enormous deal in the world. Like it was actually struggling in the 1920s, and no one knew what was going to happen, that the state would happen, etc. Right? It was a kind of almost a marginal movement in the 1920s. But here's Hitler's comment on it, and I think it's quite illuminating. He says, for while the Zionists try to make the rest of the world believe that the national consciousness of the Jew finds its satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state, there's the word Palestinian there because Palestine was where the Jews were, the Jews again slyly dupe the dumb goyim. That language is right out of the protocols. It doesn't even enter their heads to build up a Jewish state in Palestine for the purpose of living there. All they want is a central organization for their international world swindle, endowed with its sovereign right and removed from the intervention of other states, so it can be a haven for convicted scoundrels and a university for budding crooks. So I want to reflect on what he's saying there. He's saying, what is Zionism? It's not, if you ask most Jews today and then, what is Zionism? Zionism is a movement of self-determination for the Jews. It's the self-defense, so Jews can have a safe place where we aren't being pogromed. Because remember, the Russian pogroms are still going on. It's the 1920s. So for Jews, the true description of Zionism, it's a place of self-defense and refuge and self-determination for the Jewish people. But if you're looking at the world through the lens of the protocols and believe the Jews have a plot to take over the world, as I said earlier, what is Zionism going to look like to you? This is just the Jews advancing their power, right? To get a whole state. Look what they can do in this state. It would be a haven for their scoundrels and a university for budding crooks. Right? And they're not even planning to live there, he says. Or not all of them, right? Some will go live there. What about the ones who don't live there? Let's read the second paragraph there. It's a sign of their rising confidence and sense of security that at a time when one section of the Jews is still playing the German, Frenchman, or Englishman, the other with open effrontery comes out as the Jewish race. So if you're familiar with what, as you know, Jews, ask who Jews get their opinions, right? Jews disagree. In the 1920s, Jews disagreed about Zionism. There was a strong, robust anti-Zionist Jewish movement. Didn't have quite the negative connotations anti-Zionism has today. It was a reasonable position to say maybe we shouldn't develop a state, prior to the establishment of the state. And then other Jews were Zionists. The Jews who were anti-Zionists in the 1920s wanted to just assimilate in Europe. I'm a Frenchman, I'm a German, and the Zionists want to say, no, you're a Jew. A Jew is a different race. That's the language of the time than a Frenchman or a German, right? So this is an internal disagreement amongst the Jews. But how does it look in the mind of Hitler? Since in Hitler's mind, and I should say anyone who believes the protocols, the Jews are engaged in a conspiracy to take over the world, what could better advance that than first have a state where some or many of them live, but then have their agents spread out throughout the rest of the world as fifth columns, right? And so this is what he's saying here. And he's saying, oh, look at them. They're pretending, they're pretending that they're true. Some of them are saying they're not Jews, and others are saying they are Jews. It's all part of the ruse, because what they want is to establish a state and then leave their agents, their moles behind across Europe. And the reason this is important is no doubt you've asked yourself this question and come up with what is probably not the right answer to it, I think. How come when people are allegedly upset with Israel or opposed to what Israel's doing, they attack Jews everywhere else, right? And then so we've had plenty of attacks just in the United States in the past few months, even. Right? Why? What's the logic behind that? I'm not over there. I didn't do anything over there, right? And I think the important part of the answer to that is in the mind of the Jew hater that's influenced by the protocols, and I believe that many people, as we speak today, even if they would deny it, they still have this idea of a Jewish conspiracy built into their genes, so to speak. All the Jews are in on it. Right? So, okay, Israel did something over there, but you're a Jew, so you're in on it. Right? This is why you're a legitimate target. I'm going to go after a synagogue or a daycare, even the children, right? Because it's the conspiratorial thinking. For some reason, when people try to figure this out, they never notice that. Like they try to say, but I'm not responsible. It's anti-Semitism to target me for something that Israel did. Yeah, of course it's anti-Semitism because it believes that the Jews are involved in a conspiracy to take over the world. And as we speak today, in the name of anti-Zionism, hostility to Israel, Jews are being harassed, ostracized, purged from society, purged from academy, purged from campuses. Dozens of campuses have had large groups of students chanting no Zionists here, Zionists out, Zionists off campus, no space for Zionists here, things like that. It's all part of the same, ultimately, I would argue, protocols thinking. Israel's toxic in their mind. Israel's evil, but therefore all Jews are evil too. Okay. So keep that in mind next time you see someone going after the Jews here in the name of the direction, in the name of anti-Zionism. By the way, one thing I will try to push, not really in the context of this talk, but obvious reasons we all talk about and are concerned with anti-Semitism, but the primary form that anti-Semitism is taking today is anti-Zionism. So I think we need to start talking more about anti-Zionism and not get involved. This is a side point, not get involved in the debate. But is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism or not? For a couple of reasons. One is that there's not even a single agreed upon definition of anti-Zionism, and there's a whole bunch of competing definitions of anti-Semitism. So what is the point in trying to decide what if they're identical to each other? You actually can skip all that, because what you can simply show is I don't care if you want to call anti-Zionism anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism produces violence against Jews. That's all I need to know. If we look at some of the major cases just in the past year, there was the firebombing of Governor Shabira's house, right, when he was there, he and his family were home. There was the gunning down of the embassy staffers in D.C. There was the firebombing of the hostage walk in Boulder. There was the guy just drove into the synagogue in Michigan. All four of those were in the name of Free Palestine. Who cares if it's anti-Semitic or not? Okay, it's anti-Zionist, fine. They're murdering Jews in the name of anti-Zionism. So I want to make that point. And this is part of the rationale for my institute. We need to be looking at anti-Zionism now because they've managed to control the dialogue on campuses in particular. We're against anti-Semitism. SJP says they're against anti-Semitism, right? We're just anti-Zionist. So we'll say, fine, that's a hate movement. Who cares if it's the same as the anti-Semitism? So anyway, I wanted to make that point that it sort of touches here. All right, so the next major cohort in the elders of anti-Zionism are the Muslim Arab world. This conspiracy of the protocols spreads to the Arab world as well. And the relation between the Nazis and the Arabs is actually long and deep. After the war, several hundred Nazis, and people call them former Nazis, which is ridiculous. They didn't stop being Nazis, right? But after the war, several hundred Nazis, including some high-ranking officials, escaped to the Arab world. You're familiar with escaping to South America and Argentina, probably, but what's less well known is literally hundreds went to the Arab world, where they, in some cases, got high positions putting out propaganda for Arab countries, most in particular Egypt. There was in Cairo, there was an Institute for the Study of Zionism, and it was staffed by a Nazi. So he literally took his same ideology and just continued doing it, but now on the paycheck of the Egyptians, etc. So there were many important links between the Nazis and Arabs, none more important than this guy. Keep going the opposite direction by my instinct. This guy, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Mufti, that was his title, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. This guy with the little hat in the upper left there. Here's the most important thing you need to know about him. He was he would have said Arab. They didn't have the identity Palestinian yet, but he was the Palestinian Arab national political and religious leader. He was their guy from the 1920s into the 1950s. So if you want to understand the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian resistance to Zionism, he's the guy who's leading it. He's the guy who's shaping it. It's his ideas which are informing it, the Mufti. And what the next thing to know about the Mufti is that he was literally on the payroll of the Nazis. He spent the war years in Berlin. He had a very famous meeting with Hitler. The minutes of that meeting are available. You can see them talking about their plans to remove the Jews. The middle photograph is the Mufti with Himmler, who is the head of the SS, who ran the concentration camps. And he's actually at a concentration camp right there. There's other pictures of him. Great tour guide. He's got Himmler to be his tour guide, like of Auschwitz, right? And they're walking along smiling, and now they're sitting down in the sunny afternoon. And the bottom right, amongst the things he did for the Nazis for the years that he worked in Berlin, first of all, he was in charge of Arab propaganda to the Middle East. So he was producing Arab broadcasts across the Middle East that were on the Nazi networks. And what was he disseminating? The protocols of the Elders of Zion, amongst many other things, also the Islamic Jew hate that I mentioned earlier. But he also assembled several Muslim units that fought with the Nazis in the war. Literally, he's a Nazi. He's literally on the payroll. He's doing Nazi things, spreading Nazi propaganda, forming Nazi military units to fight this. And he was working with the Nazis specifically to bring the final solution to the Middle East. And I don't know if you know this, but Einsatzgruppen were like the Nazi units that began the Holocaust in the Pale of Settlement by going town to town and shooting everybody. They had one formed, I think it was in Egypt, and they were just waiting for the Nazi army to conquer Palestine, and then they were going to go in and continue the final solution. Came that close, right? They came very, very close. That was the Mufti who organized this. And as you'll see in the bottom left, there's a quote from this guy named Al-Banna. Who is Al-Banna? Al-Banna is the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, founded in the 1920s. The Muslim Brotherhood is a fundamentalist, today we say Islamist, if you want to distinguish it from Islamic, but a radical fundamentalist Islamic group that believes that Islam has to conquer the entire world. It believes very openly, just read any of these documents by these people, the Jews are the main enemy of Islam since the 7th century. They tried to kill Muhammad, the prophet, and they've been trying to destroy Islam ever since. And so if we're going to conquer the world, the first thing we have to do is destroy the Jews. This, they believe, for 14 centuries. This isn't a new 20th century belief. They already believe this. And then, of course, Hitler comes along. They worship Hitler because Hitler's doing the work that needs to be done for different reasons. But Hitler then introduces them to the protocols. So on top of hating the Jews, not just hating, needing to eliminate the Jews because of Islam, they now need to eliminate the Jews because of the Jewish plot to take over the world. That's Al-Banna, right? The founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. After the war, when the Mufti escaped being brought to justice because of the French, it's a whole separate thing. The French didn't want him prosecuted for many reasons. But he returned back to the Middle East, and Al-Banna said this: "What a hero, what a miracle of a man. This hero who challenged an empire and fought Zionism with the help of Hitler and Germany. Germany and Hitler are gone, but Amina Husseini will continue the struggle," i.e. the Mufti's continuing Hitler's work. That's the thing to keep in mind. This is the Palestinian anti-Zionist movement. It is the continuation of the Nazis. So when they tell you today, and yes, here we're talking 1940s or so, right? So, but when they tell you today, the defense of Palestinian rights, it's social justice, human rights, they have all the same rights, etc. That sounds wonderful and good, but keep in mind that the movement is born in the continuation of the final solution. It is a movement to eliminate the Jews. It's not really a movement for a Palestinian state. It is a movement to eliminate the Jews. Okay, how are we doing? Running behind. What else is new? All right. The next major quote, by the way, the Arab Muslim world, that's enormous. That's big, right? That's a lot of people in the world. And when I say tens or hundreds of millions of people believe the protocols today, you start with the Arab Muslim world. All over the Arab Muslim world, they believe it, right? So we're working our way towards the whole world. Well, you don't make more progress than that than by bringing in the Soviets. At its peak, the Soviet Union, and this is like a stunning figure, took up 1/6 of the globe, and that's not even considering all the countries it influenced and controlled, right? Which was another, 40% of the globe or something like that. The Soviet Union is enormous. The Soviet Union is unfortunately overshadowed by the Nazis in the following sense. People don't realize just how evil the Soviet Union was with respect to its Jews. It shouldn't surprise us. The Soviet Union is the continuation of Russia. Russia hated its Jews. Remember those pogroms for 40 years. And it's true that when the Communist Revolution came along in 1917, that at least officially, Lenin actually had a few very nice essays where he said, we have to stop being so anti-Semitic. So there was a little bit of improvement. But you don't turn off overnight something that is literally centuries old and just built into the culture, right? So the hatred of the Jews continues throughout the Soviet period. It doesn't produce the outright Holocaust the way the Nazis did, which is why the Soviets are maybe not seen as evil. But as you start studying what they do, you should realize they're as evil as the Nazis, and what they would like to see happen is the elimination of all the Jews. So here, the key scholar, and every time I go the wrong direction, in the interest of time, let me just mention this woman. She's been doing a lot of the key work here, Isabella Tabarovsky, documenting, basically to summarize it, the Soviet Union, especially from the 1960s afterwards, decided it was time to get rid of the Jews. They'd had enough. And so they began this massive propaganda campaign. And once again, it was the professors. They developed these institutes of Zionology to study Zionism and Israel. And they started pumping out books and articles, hundreds of books, tens of thousands of articles, radio broadcasts, etc., all over their sphere of influence, which is like 70% of the globe as we're getting into the 1960s and 1970s, right? And this is where they're living. Every allegation that you hear today on campuses comes right out of the Soviet playbook. This is where they first proclaim Zionism is racism because it's grounded in Jewish chosenness. They think Jewish supremacy. Zionism and because it's racist, that's where apartheid comes out of too, because the Jews will have to segregate themselves. They think they're better than the Palestinians or the Arabs. The idea that Jews are committing ethnic cleansing or committing genocide, the Soviets were alleging genocide constantly for years and years and years. In fact, that genocide allegation goes back to the protocols. The protocols openly says the Jews have an ambition to literally eliminate all the people of the world. So they accused the Jews of genocide 120 years ago, right? It's not a new allegation. And in fact, it has almost nothing to do with anything Israel's actually doing. They've decided in advance, Israel, the Jews are committing genocide. And so, okay, now battle has happened. There's genocide, right? The verdict comes first. And where does it come from? It comes right out of the Soviet campaigns. And worse than that, the Soviet Union, there's good reason to believe they actually created the Palestinian identity and founded the Palestine Liberation Organization. They took this Egyptian guy, Yasser Arafat, pretended he was a Palestinian Arab, made him the leader. So not only are they churning out this ideology, they are literally funding and arming the terrorists who are trying to kill the Jews from at least the 1960s onwards, 60s, 70s, 80s. And not only the terrorists, but all the Arab armies, right, from the Six-Day War and the 1973 war, etc., they're all funded by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union is trying to do the same thing Hitler did, literally murder all the Jews through the Arabs and through this ideology. Unless you think this is all in the past, yeah, so this is bringing the Palestinians into that story now because they're pounding the Palestinians. The Soviet-driven conspiracy about the Jews, lest you think it's all in the past, consider the current president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud, and also PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, currently serving, as we like to say, the 22nd year of his 4-year term. Turns out Abbas not only had been a KGB spy in Damascus, in the early 1980s, he has a PhD. I don't know if you know that. It's Dr. Abbas to you. And what is his PhD in? Well, he got it in Moscow at one of these institutes for Zionology, writing a dissertation denying the Holocaust. Right? So literally the current president of the Palestinian Authority is one of these Soviet propagandists whose goal is to eliminate all of the Jews. And just last month, it's now March. What are we in? It's still in April. Yeah. So last month, you see on the right there, Mahmoud Abbas gives orders to name a hall. I think it was in Ramallah after the Palestinian Hitler ally, the Mufti. So lest again you think this is in the past. Just last month, they're honoring the Mufti, who is their great leader, by naming some hall after him in Ramallah. And what did the Mufti do? The Mufti carried on Hitler's final solution. This is the Palestinian position. It's not about self-determination and equal rights. It's about eliminating the Jews. And it's all informed by the protocols. It's all informed by this need to stop the Jews from taking over the world. All right, let me get to the next bit there. The Western progressives. Do this and then we'll do one more and then we'll try to wrap it up. The Western progressives, these are the ones who are the primary problem on the campuses because campuses today are dominated by this progressive ideology. Progressive ideology will begin by saying, I'm against anti-Semitism. They absolutely say that, and as well as every other, form of bigotry and oppression, they like to say. They would say the protocols, that's a famous anti-Semitic text, we're against that too, right? But if you know anything about the basic ideas of progressivism, here we need a whole lecture, but I'm going to summarize it very quickly. The basic worldview of progressivism that's dominant on our campuses is something like this. The world divides into oppressors and oppressed, these binary categories. And roughly speaking, white people oppress people of color, men oppress women, straight people oppress non-straight people, cis people oppress trans people, Western nations oppress their former colonized nations, and so forth. That's how they understand everything. They understand they're fundamentally anti-capitalist, and so they see any form of inequality as a kind of oppression. If some people have more money than others, ultimately it's because the people with money took the money from the people who don't have the money. So the successful people are actually oppressors. They are benefiting from their privilege and their power and exploiting the people who are less well off. This should sound familiar. You've heard these, you hear these ideas all the time now, right? Okay, so far so good. What does this have to do with the protocol? So the picture they end up coming up with is, of course, if you think about inequality, you'll immediately be drawn to like the 1%, or whatever, the very wealthy. And by the way, on this dynamic, everyone in this room is considered successful and wealthy and an oppressor. Right? You might feel like I'm struggling to make ends meet, I don't have enough money, et cetera, but not on this ideology. So they end up developing a view where really a small group of people are controlling all the power in order to control and oppress the large majority of people. Does that start to sound a little bit familiar, right? We have one foot in the protocols now, right? This idea that really the successful people are coordinating with themselves to control and oppress the less successful people. Okay, so they actually have a kind of conspiracy theory going on there. What does that have to do with the Jews? Well, they look at the Jews and they say the Jews on average are more successful than other even white groups. First of all, they see the Jews as being white, which is very problematic because Nazis murdered the Jews for not being white. But they see the Jews as being white. But on average, Jews are more successful than other groups. So we are actually at the top of that hierarchy, considered on average, which means it's really the Jews who are oppressing and controlling all the other people and all the marginalized people in the countries. I kid you not. Now, I defy you to distinguish that from the protocols, the Elders Design. The protocol said this little minority group is trying to control and take power over everybody else. And the progressives say the same thing, literally the same thing. So however they distinguish themselves from anti-Semitism, however they distinguish themselves from racists, etc., they are literally operating in the same structural framework as the protocols of the Elders of Zion, whether they want to accept it or not. And so the progressives are in on it too. The progressives. And so go back to Zionism and Hitler. Hitler said, oh, those Jews, they're not just trying to make a state so they can live safely and not be murdered and have self-determination and God forbid maybe flourish, that's not what it's about. It's part of their plot to take over the world. It has to be stopped. The Western progressives, that is why they are anti-Zionists, because they look at Israel and they see Israel as an extension of this plan to increase power through capitalism and military, etc., to conquer the world. The progressives are following Hitler's ideology, like almost indistinguishably, despite denying it. Okay. And they do this in the name of anti-racism, social justice, human rights. Right? And yet what they're selling, this is a woman who has an excellent essay on this. So I was sort of summarizing her views. All right. I have a whole bunch of the protocols, but I want to go to the last, there's some good stuff in here I'm skipping, sorry. I come back for more some other time. Another AIM is there. Oh, you know what? I updated, you don't have the update. All right. So there's another one. Between 6 and 7, the woke right. Right. I said it's coming from every direction. I tend to focus on the progressives because that's the ecosystem I live in on campuses. They're all progressive. There's very few conservatives, much less sort of extreme right-wing people on campuses. So they're not that much of a problem or a threat on campuses, which is my focus. However, that is changing. Certainly if you're following just outside of campus, right? The extreme right, old-fashioned anti-Semitism, we want to say, is absolutely on the upswing again. And a reason for that is that the left, I would argue, has made it permissible to hate the Jews over the last 10, 20 years, right? And so once the progressives on campus basically make it fashionable and cool to call for the death of Israel, which is to call for the death of many, many Jews, right? Let's not make any mistake there. Then the right wing just comes right out of the woodwork, where it never goes away. It like gets into the shadows, right? And so we've seen certainly the major influencers, whether it's a Candace Owens or a Tucker Carlson, and in fact, Turning Point USA, if you're familiar with that group, has a lot of campus chapters, including one on my own campus, which I'm the faculty advisor for, and I can tell you why I agreed to do that in a second. Turning Point is a complicated right-wing conservative organization, which is growing on campuses now. Some of them, Charlie Kirk was pretty okay with Israel, but there's a growing surge of anti-Zionism now in these right-wing organizations. Like I said, I think the permission structure is there for them as well. And I agree, this kid, he's very, very bright kid and earnest. And my biggest objection to the academy today, amongst the many reasons to hate the professors, ideological bubble. There's just like one narrow set of acceptable views, and you have to accept it or you're out or canceled, which is what ultimately happened to me. So I consider it essential to introduce the dissenting views, even if I don't agree with those views myself. Like, they need to hear different views. And this kid said he went to a number of people. No faculty member was willing to serve as a faculty advisor for this club, and you have to have a faculty advisor. And I said, fine, I'll do it. And I know I looked at their platform. I disagree with 80% of what Turning Point endorses, right? But those views need to be heard, if only to be rejected. Right? They need to be heard. And, you know, unfortunately, I think the group is leaning anti-Israel now, which is upset. I don't want to empower the haters of Israel, but it is important that these dissenting views be heard. So I agreed to be faculty advisor to this. And you would not believe the grief I've gotten from the rest of my community, including the students who are outraged, first, that a Turning Point chapter could be on our campus because it's evil. They're like the Nazis. This is the language they use. And then they directed it towards me because I'm the one who agreed to be the faculty advisor. Anyway, it's coming from every direction. It's coming from every direction, and it's extremely scary. So I'll end by just saying a couple of things about what can we do, because that's what here's what we need to do. We need to, there's many groups working, too many cooks in the kitchen even, right? The groups. And what we need are elders. What we need are elders, which we don't have, right? We've got a lot of different groups. They typically don't get along. They're competing with each other. There's turf wars, etc. Each individual group's doing great stuff, but we're not coordinated. We also have been focusing, as I mentioned, on anti-Semitism, using that word and that language for obvious reasons. It's important reasons. We've done a bunch of things over the last 20 years. By we, I mean the Jews, the Zionists, all decent, sane people. We've established Jewish studies programs on campuses, Israel studies programs, Holocaust studies programs. We've promoted Zionism. There's groups that are like really big on promoting Zionism. We have undertaken lawfare, right? Especially since October 7th, all sorts of lawsuits and things going on campuses. We actually worked hard to get Jews covered by the DEI industry, the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, because they're supposed to protect oppressed minorities, and we Jews feel like we're an oppressed minority. But you can see how that went. Literally, the DEI people like look at the Jews and say, like, I don't understand. You're an oppressor. What do you mean you're coming to me for protection? And even after October 7th, most of the DEI people were all in on the rallies against Israel. So we've been doing things like that. All of them failed. All of them were valuable, well-intentioned, produced some good, but they all failed to stop the growing tide of Jew hate because they were not looking at the right thing. What is the right thing? The fucking professors. It's the professors and the ideology. I mentioned Hitler's professors. Didn't get a chance to talk about it, but the Soviet propaganda campaign, which was also run by professors, were Brezhnev's professors. And then we have a whole series of professors that I call Hamas's professors. They are doing for Hamas what Brezhnev's professors did for the Soviets and Hitler's professors did for the Nazis, and they're all over. They have an institute, they have conferences. There's this endless circuit of there was just one. There have been several around in the past year and a half. Just 2 weeks ago, there was what should genocide studies look like after October 7th? And it was staffed entirely by anti-Israel people, right? They've literally taken over the academy. So what is it we need to do? We need to go after the professors. We need to go after that ideology. We need to show that this set of ideologies that includes progressivism, unfortunately, because progressivism had a few valuable things to it, I believe, but that baby has long been drowned in the bathwater, as I like to say. We need to go after this ideology and expose it for what it is. It's Hitler's scientific Jew hatred. Right? We need to show that it's a hate movement, that it produces violence against Jews, and that ultimately, academically, and I do believe this, it's a fraud. It's an emperor's new clothes situation. You start looking at each of these doctrines, and I can go into more detail if you know about settler colonial studies. Settler colonial studies is a whole area of study, and its fundamental conclusion is Jews are evil, right? But it's not just that they misapply their principles to Israel, it's that the whole thing is bullshit. Like the whole ideology is bullshit. But we've not had the will or interest to go after them. And I'll wrap up with this. Why? Because I'm speculating here. We're actually good people. I believe the Jews are really fundamentally good people. And because we're good people, we actually really care about helping the marginalized and the oppressed. As you know, most Jews are on the left side of the political spectrum. Most Jews were all in DEI stuff. We really believed in anti-racism because we're really good people and we wanted to fight these things. What was I going to say with that? I just lost my train of thought there.
We're good, but we should.
This is why we haven't gone after them.
Yeah.
Because the anti-racist ideology, which is at the essence of progressivism, has established you're not allowed to punch down. You can criticize, you go after power structures, you can punch up, but if you punch down and criticize marginalized, oppressed people, you're just exerting your power over them. So what we've done is we've allowed them to dominate the academy for the last 2 decades, saying all sorts of outrageous things about the Jews, and it's driven a lot by, let's say, SJPs, the Palestinian groups, etc., but also the Western progressive groups. If you criticize them, you're a racist, right? They dominated this language. We are anti-racist. So if you critique us, doesn't matter how correct and honest and fair the critique is, you're a racist. So we didn't. We stepped back. We watched them take over, and we watched October 7th happen. And of course, this was the response to October 7th, because what they see when they look at the Middle East are white colonizers, powerful people oppressing these people of color who are just resisting their oppression. Who wouldn't root for the underdog in that term? Everything is wrong with that analysis that I just gave you, but that's how they see it, because we have been afraid to basically call, emperor's new clothes, call out you're naked. Right? That your theory is actually bullshit, right? And so I've launched the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism, and I want to be the elder. I'm trying to mobilize, incentivize, and coordinate a community-wide attack on this ideology. And I'm happy to say I have over 190 scholars on my roster, growing every day. The Substack, if you want to follow what we're doing, over 3,700 followers. So put your email address down if you want to be subscribed to that. We've already launched our first project. We're about to finish a 6-part webinar series on the history of anti-Zionism, sort of similar to this. We're launching an encyclopedia. I have some wonderful seed funding that will get me through the first year. I am in search of a Jewish philanthropist who might want to fund this so that it can persist. So if you happen to know any, please let me know. But that's what we're doing. We're actually going after the ideology, which is all these other things, the promotion of Zionism, and I will wrap up with this. Promoting Zionism is great. Actually, the Jews are great. We've contributed more to the world per capita than maybe any other people, right? While being persecuted and pogromed and on the run, like for centuries and centuries. We're actually really, really great people. And promoting Zionism is important. But here's the thing. If someone is casting you as a genocidal, baby-killing, ethnic-cleansing murderer, and you say, but cherry tomatoes, iPhones, whatever, like, it's not interesting. Hitler made the trains run on time. That was great. But who cares? He's a genocidal monster. So promoting Zionism, in retrospect, as important as it is, it's not going to do anything about this ideology. It almost makes you worse, because now you're ignoring how evil it is. Right? And so to even the lawfare that's going on now, which is important. We need to do it. The various lawsuits, however you feel about the federal government intervening, there's lots to say on those subjects. At best, what can that do? That can force universities to clamp down on open expression of Jew hatred. You can't have the same rallies anymore. They're going to come down on you. Okay, here's what it can't do. Stop you from hating the Jews in the first place. You have to go after the thing that makes people hate the Jews, and that thing is the ideology that their professors are teaching. So we need to, and it can't be, one guy writes a paper one day, another one. It has to be, we need to flood the academic square with the scholarship so that everyone recognizes that the emperor has no clothes. And this is what we're doing. So I will stop there. Happy to take questions and comments. Thank you. Yeah,
Before I heard you talking, I've heard you talk before, I mean, several times, mostly in.
same jokes. I know you hear the same jokes.
But I thought the solution was, if you know the history of Israel, you know, that would solve, and most of these people don't. The older people do.
Right.
And I'm just going to say, aren't they teaching? And they're probably not teaching the history.
Right, there.
And now I feel, I don't know, I mean, after hearing you now, it's like, it doesn't matter.
No,
What,
would you summarize the question for the folks on Zoom?
I'm not sure I can summarize the question. So well, it was thought, and it's a reasonable thought, that one way to deal with the problem is to make sure that correct history of Israel is being taught.
Right.
Absolutely. But
Seems like it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. Well, here's part of what's happened is this is how the process works, and there's historical precedents for this. When you make Israel toxic by alleging all these horrible things, it's an evil, evil place, it's a racist place, it's an apartheid place, etc., etc. Because of the conspiratorial thinking, you automatically make all Jews toxic. And so what Jews, and they don't, there are people, there are still courses teaching the history of Israel, but who's taking them? Only the Jews who, they're not gonna reach the middles, right? You're never going to reach the haters. That's not going to happen. But the middle, because Jews are toxic. And so even where they're being taught, they're not effective, right?
And yet Martin Luther King, how Jews were, you know, supported Jews more than anyone. Martin Luther King, and yet black people, a lot of them do not.
Yeah, and that's actually a very complicated story about like the black community's relationship to Zionism. There was a strong thread of Zionism in sort of the early days, like in the 50s, 60s, etc. Martin Luther King was adequately a Zionist, etc. But at the same time, you know, these progressive ideologies were really taking off in the 60s. And the 60s is when Marxism, which was originally about economics, it was about richer people and poorer people, bourgeoisie and proletariat. In the 1960s, that became the multi-headed hydra or monster, which is progressivism today, where they use the same basic categories. There's oppressor and oppressed. So for Marxism, bourgeois proletariat, basically, you know, the wealthy people, poor people, etc. But now they start applying those same categories to first, racism became the big thing. So white versus black. And then men versus women. So that's the rise of the modern feminist movement in the 1960s. And also the gay rights movement begins because straight versus gay. And at the same time, what else is going on in the world in the 50s and 60s? Decolonization. It's the end of these European empires. You know, Africa like introduces like 40 new countries into the UN in the course of like 8 years, right? So that Marxist binary gets applied there too. Colonizer, colonized, and it's all seen the same thing. So the image is straight white male Europeans are oppressing everyone who's not those things. And so the black movement, while some were Zionists, especially because the left was actually friendly to Zionism from the 40s onwards, at least, because they saw the underdog. It was Jews versus Arabs. Right. And if you frame it that way, the Jews are tiny, the Arabs are enormous, right? There's 23 Arab countries, they're 500 times the size, 500 times the population. The left, which tends to side with the underdog, sided with the Jews and was Zionist for those couple of decades. But what starts to happen, and this is actually the Soviet Union, when I talked about their ideology campaign, the Soviet Union invented the idea of the Palestinian people, and they started the PLO because they wanted to reframe the way people thought about this conflict. It's no longer Jews versus Arabs, because Jews are little, Arabs are big. It's now Israelis versus Palestinians, right? And Israel is big and Palestinians are small, or certainly weaker, because they're doing this in the 1960s after the state of Israel has been established. So that little move, and it's really stunning because everyone falls for it, right? Like, it's the same conflict, but if you think about it one way, you're going to naturally side with the Jews. You think about it a different way, you're going to side with the Palestinians. And so the black community, certainly the more extreme version of the black community, because of these dichotomies, well, white oppresses color, colonizer oppresses colonized. And so white Jews are white, so they're on this end. And so we as blacks should have solidarity with the Palestinians, right? And so from the 60s onwards, extremer parts of the black community were absolutely anti-Zionist. And that brief period of being supportive of Zionists sort of faded. But this was, it was cooked up by Brezhnev's professors. They came, like, how can we do this, right? Yes.
So maybe I'll get up because I know you want to, I want to tell you. It was just last week, I went to Brown because the people that were running for mayor were gonna have, it wasn't a debate, but you know, you could meet the mayor. So I'm getting close to Brown and I knew the building was somewhere over there. So I just went up to this kid, assuming he's a Brown student, and I said, hey, I'm looking for whatever hall, Lyman Hall. And I did have on my pen and I did have on a hat with the Star of David on it. And he goes, yeah, it's right around the corner. So I go, no, thanks. So I walk away and all of a sudden I hear somebody start yelling about Smiley and the Jews and all this stuff. And I turned around and this kid is yelling at me. So I walk back and I go, what? And he goes, Smiley is just a shill to Israel. And I looked at him like, I couldn't believe. I mean, my whole point is, I thought that was like a one-off.
That's right.
But
No,
this kid
you should have said protocol
that.
touch.
Well-
Because that's his mind.
Until I heard what you said today,
Right.
I thought this was just this one Brown student of all these Brown students that such.
No.
Smiley was, became Jewish because he was a shill for Israel.
Right.
And I couldn't
And he's
believe
not
it.
even
Now I can
particularly
believe it.
friendly towards Israeli. I mean, he's not anti-Israel, I think, but
Yeah.
it doesn't
no,
have to be true.
no.
That's was
But
doesn't have
thank
to be
you,
true.
because
Yeah.
there must be a lot of other Brown students that
No,
think like
it's just this ideology creates that. Yes, ma'am.
Talking about anti-Semitism and everything
Yeah.
on college campuses. What about the school, the public school? And the reason I'm asking is in 1994, when my daughter was in third grade, when I picked her up, she said, I always asked what kind of day she had. And she told me one of the students had a swastika on a jacket. It was too late for me to call school. It was a Friday, but I was not happy. So at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I was on the phone and I saw, they put me through to the principal. My daughter was smart enough to tell me the name of the student.
Yeah.
So when I picked her up, she told me he got called to the principal's office.
Yeah. So third grade. No, so I could go at length. So K through 12 is a shit show, frankly. It's just really scary. And this is, again, we're playing catch up here. They were aware. And actually, a lot of this began in the education schools where they were training teachers. So the education schools were the first wave of getting gripped by this progressive ideology, which was deeply anti-Zionist. And it's churned out, these schools have churned out some decades now of teachers who are sort of immersed in this as they go into the classroom. I don't know how activist they were in the classroom for a while, but now they're extremely activist. So there's all these curricula for K through 12, literally teaching kids as young as 5, like kindergarten kids, etc., that Israel stole the land from the Palestinians, right? In a number of schools, absolutely. You need, every local person has to look what's being taught in their local school district, because they create these curricula and then they sell them or distribute them to school districts, or teachers often have some amount of leeway. So they are operating in K through 12 and have been for really a couple of decades now. And we are way behind. We have some people, a couple people may institute, but there's another group called the North American Values Institute, which is focusing on the K through 12. The most immediate focus of that now is California developed this ethnic studies curriculum, which sounds wonderful because California is like many different ethnicities there. Don't you want to learn about all the different peoples of the world who live in California? Yeah, but what do they teach? They basically teach that the Jews are white supremacist oppressors and privileged, and the Palestinians are marginalized and have had their land stolen from them. So this is
Here in Hebrew school, too.
yeah. So this is going on in elementary schools, and starting in California, already in Massachusetts, there's the big movement there to move the same curriculum into Massachusetts. I don't remember where it stands. So local people need to pay attention. I'm going to say one more thing just about that. So the swastikas, right? So swastikas at the Allgemeiner, I don't know if it was a joke or whatever, but we used to think we need to get a swastika counter just in the office, right? Because every day I was reporting, I mean, it's on college campuses primarily, but also schools, swastikas everywhere, every day, all over, right? But the swastika used to only mean the sort of easily recognizable neo-Nazi, right-wing, evil, anti-Semitic guy. But it doesn't mean that anymore because another part of the Soviet campaign was to deliberately say that Israel is the new Nazis. This was like a Soviet part of the Soviet propaganda. And so the swastika now can represent, it can be a progressive person can also endorse the swastika now as well, because what it's representing, it's calling Israel a Nazi. So either it's a right-wing person threatening the Jew with the swastika, or it's a left-wing person.
How could a third grader really know what it was?
Third graders can't know, but yeah.
I mean, I blame parents.
Or the teachers, I don't know, that, who knows?
Because I know.
Well, yeah.
Teacher would know.
Well, in that case, probably the parent, but today it's really, it's dominant all the way down, right? Like little kids are being exposed to these basic ideas. Yes, sir.
We don't know about right-wing anti-Semitism.
Right.
Can you say something about left-wing anti-Semitism?
So let me first say that right wing is also anti-Zionist too, right? And we're seeing that now with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and who's the other guy? I forget his name. I follow it less closely, the right wing stuff. But they are, and they'll frame it in different ways, America first or something, which sounds like that's a nice principle. But if it turns out that the only country that you want to cut off an alliance with is Israel, then it's not so nice, right? So that's more right wing. It's usually more easily recognizable as targeting the Jews. But the left wing is in the name of anti-racism, social justice. We want to support the marginalized peoples of the world. And so they'll call themselves pro-Palestinian. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being pro anything. Like to be pro any group, like wonderful. You want to support that group, you want to help that group, etc. But what is 100% clear in almost 100% of the circumstances is that almost none of the people who call themselves pro-Palestinian actually care about Palestinians. And you can actually demonstrate that all sorts of different ways. What they really care about is destroying the Jewish state. They care about the Jewish state. And so it would be one thing, I personally believe if you're for the two-state solution in some sort of theoretical domain, you can't object to that. That's okay. That's a compromise. Both people get something, etc. But that is actually not the nature of this movement that's called the pro-Palestinian movement. Because if it were, they could have had their second state 1937, the first partition proposal, right? What's clear is, and they, by the way, they don't hide it. They openly say that they don't care about having their own Palestinian state. They care about destroying the Jewish state, right? So it is anti-Zionist, and it is not in the name of pro anything. It's in the name of preventing the Jews from having any sort of power. It's driven by the protocols and therefore anti-Semitic. Maria.
Which is
Okay.
Institute put out guidance on evaluation for 10-year scientific failures of the anti-Zionist movement.
Eventually, we're not yet in a position to do that, but we first want to just to give you a sense of what the academy is like on many campuses. It's not everywhere, by the way, but the most important campuses, the prestigious ones, and the ones where the Jews tend to have significant numbers. It is really scary to be a Zionist and be in public. You will get a lot of abuse. You will be ostracized. Yeah, no, I myself was canceled, and I am the only open Zionist on my campus, and I feel the need to speak up. But the social pressure, and especially for the students, especially the Jewish students. I'm talking a little bit about the Jewish students, right? The Jewish students, if you're a Zionist on campus, and there are campuses that have some good groups. My own son is at McGill, which has a lot of Jew hatred going on, but there's actually a pretty vibrant Jewish and Zionist community, so they've got peers. But if you're a Jewish Zionist student, you're largely going to be hated, and no one's going to date you, and they're not going to invite you to parties, and they kick you out of clubs. I mentioned the phrase like Zionist off campus, no space for Zionists. Those slogans come from student clubs that have nothing to do with like Middle East or politics or anything. It could be like the dance club. Sorry, no Zionists here, right? That's a real example. That was from Syracuse. I think Syracuse University a few years ago. Right? So if you're a Jewish Zionist, that's the end of your social life. And college at least, I don't know, 90% of it's about social life, right? Or some hard percentage of it. But imagine if you're a Jewish student and you decide to be anti-Zionist, right? You are celebrated. You are adored because you can show we're not anti-Semitic. We have our Jewish friends here who also hate Israel, right? So think about the pressure, the social pressure on your average Jewish student. Choose Zionism, choose your people, etc. You're ostracized, you're a social outcast. Choose anti-Zionism and you are a hero, absolutely a hero. So the pressure is enormous. And that's, by the way, you would hope that wouldn't be true of the adults and the professors, but it's equally true of the adults and professors. There's social pressure, there's professional pressure. One of the really scary things is not only does this anti-Zionism dominate the academic public square on most important universities, but it made it impossible to be a graduate student in most disciplines and be a Zionist. I'm getting a bunch of graduate students that are getting involved in my institute now, because to be a Zionist, you're destroying your career prospects, right? You're not going to get a job if you're a Zionist. So they actually emptied the pipeline, which means the next generation of professors is going to continue this. They reproduce themselves. We were talking about tenure, right? So, it turns out in most places, talk about this like mafioso level corruption, right? Like basically the professors decide on tenuring the next set of professors, which maybe you could justify that one way or another. But the idea is if the professors are gripped by this ideology that's full of hate, who are they going to tenure? More of the same. They're just going to propagate themselves and reproduce themselves, right? So they control the academy. They've emptied the grad student pipeline. So amongst the things, I have a long list of projects. This is why I need a real philanthropist. I'm trying to get undergraduates involved as well, not necessarily to do the scholarship, but I want to, for example, next year do an undergraduate academic conference on anti-Zionism. I want to get some undergraduates doing the scholarship so that they become graduate students, and I'm supporting graduate students so that they become professors, right? So we need to get more powerful, and that's the answer to the question, Maria. Like we need to get more powerful first, where we can, if we have a few of us and then we're on the tenure committee, then we can begin to make that change. But right now, we don't have the power.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, yes, sir.
By your definition of Zionism,
Yeah.
the Jewish people have a right to live in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Yes or no?
You want what is my personal opinion on that matter? Why does my personal opinion on that matter? Lots of people debate it. So
by your definition to be a Zionist.
Yeah.
Who is the Zionist? Okay. Those people who are living now, half million people living in Judea, Samaria, they doing the right stuff or not?
I'm not going to address that question because let me afterwards, I'm happy to share my opinions on those things with you. But my institute, I want it to be as big a tent as possible, but you can't be an anti-Zionist in the tent. But I think it's very important that I have people, let's say, on the kind of far left who may not be such fans of Zionism. They might be very critical of settlements and occupation and Israeli policies. As long as they recognize that anti-Zionism is a hate ideology, that's fine. Because what'll happen is if I don't have those voices in my tent, then this whole institute will be seen as like a right-wing Zionist hack group or something like it. It will be dismissed, right? Because what's also important here, and I do sincerely believe this, as I mentioned, anti-Zionism only flies because it violates all sorts of academic norms. And part of what I want to do is reestablish those norms that have been openly violated. Now, I can be explicit. They openly say, for example, this is part of progressivism and critical race theory, that there's no distinction between scholarship and activism. They say that, right? And the other side says that explicitly. And so therefore, anything they produce is to advance power, right? Which means it doesn't care whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter how true it is. It's advancing your interest. And to me, that is an attack on the heart of the academy, attack on Western civilization, etc. So it's very important that I not be seen, my institute not be seen as doing that. And the best way for that is to have a wide variety of perspectives, from pretty far left to pretty far right. So moving forward, I'm not necessarily going to share my own views publicly. I don't think they particularly matter. People who think Jews shouldn't be in Judea, Samaria, as long as you think anti-Zionism is a problem, okay, I'll have you in my institute. People who think damn straight they belong there, I want them in my institute too. So I'm not going to give my personal opinion because I just don't think it matters. Yes, sir.
But you also use the word science.
Yeah.
But by means of word science, regarding those territories,
there's many different definitions, so I'm open to a variety. But let me come to this guy over here. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm living for this now. My son's a junior in high school. He did some college this week. Went to Cranston University in Maryland. Hillel was having a Yom HaTzmaut celebration. Came up with this camera recording, how can you do this? Oh, there's genocide going on in the, when I was a sophomore in college, she was applying to schools on October 7th, and then reassessed the whole selection process.
Yeah.
Blaming Mary and Virginia, and we're seeing a lot of Jewish students kind of migrating south to school.
They are, yeah.
Is that, do you think that those schools are really better? Is it just hasn't been thinking of a focus down there?
Based on my understanding, so that we are seeing Jewish students move away from the worst schools and move especially to the south, right? Like there's some Florida schools, and Vanderbilt is getting a lot of good press. My niece is going to Elon College or University, I can't remember, in North Carolina. So there's definitely been a migration, for sure. But the question is, are they really better? I'm under the impression they are, as far as I could see, right? You know, especially like at Vanderbilt, like they were very clear about what it actually was all could have been very simple. Think about like the encampments and the protests, especially during 23, 24, right? Every college has a basic set of rules about behavior and conduct. And every single one of those protests and encampments violated those rules. And the problem was the universities didn't refuse to enforce the rules. So it's actually very simple, just enforce the rules. It's actually, as we speak right now, there are 2 encampments that just popped up at Occidental College and the second one. I can't remember now. Occidental College, which is in LA. Smith, because just last week, the Smith SJP and like Brown, the Smith board agreed to entertain this BDS proposal that was before the trustees. But then the advisory group at Smith decided not to decide. They weren't going to reach a decision on it, which was equivalent to at least deferring it enough. So the Smith SJP responded by establishing an encampment, which as of yesterday or so had been up for a week. And they did nothing, right? And these are breaking so many rules, these encampments break. So I'm under the impression that some of these southern schools are just doing a better job enforcing the rules. And we are seeing immigration without question. Students are flying to these places. My own son is just committed to Binghamton next year because Binghamton has made it clear that it's going to be Jew friendly, right? Which is wonderful. That doesn't mean there can't be a person or a group or a protest. That can happen too. And that's fine, by the way. We believe in freedom of speech. Follow the rules. You should have a protest. That's fine. But the issue is that should not allow you to literally control the campus or to harass and ostracize the Jewish students. They have the right to their free opinions as well. So the schools that stick to that are getting more of the Jews. So, if we want to be hopeful, which is not my nature, but my glass is 2/3 empty and leaking, as I like to say. But if we want to be hopeful, we've seen this story before, right? And so countries that kick out their Jews end up going into decline, and wherever the Jews end up going, that place ends up rising, right? And it wouldn't surprise me. There's a tremendous flux in higher education right now, both for economic reasons, demographic reasons, legal reasons, etc. Who knows what the landscape will look like even 10 years from now, right? Like the Ivy League, we've seen some cracks in the Ivy League, and there's a couple places I think that are still okay. Dartmouth got really good grades overall, for example. But I think Harvard and Yale, they'll get taken down a notch, and other schools are coming up, right? So kick out your Jews. In the end, you're going to harm yourself if you want to be helpful and elevate elsewhere. All right, maybe one last question. I'm mindful of the time.
One last question in the chat is how do we combat this anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism, and especially minds that are being shaped by repeated anti-Semitic propaganda?
You donate to the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. So what you need to do is change the ideology. By the way, my plan is this is a long game, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take, it took a generation to get to this point where they fully captured the academy. Probably will take a generation to not recapture, but at least get back to the center again, get back to some place of balance. But we have to play the long game. In addition to putting out the fires as they arise, like lawfare or whatever, we need to play the long game. So, there are a bunch of groups that are all doing great work. I particularly like Students Supporting Israel. Hillels are complicated. Hillels are complicated because they have to be home to all Jews, and too many Jews are anti-Zionist. So Hillels are always trying to finesse things. Students Supporting Israel is a campus group that just is unabashedly pro-Israel, and they will do some aggressive things in a good way. For example, what they're doing right now is they're bringing an idea of soldier or reservist to campus, right? And they get lots of protests, but you know what? You have a right to bring an idea of a soldier or a reservist to campus and hear their perspective. And so support SSI is what I would say. Support Ricky for sure, without question, because Ricky is boots on the ground, showing up where it needs to be shown up. And Institute for Quick Study of Antisemitism, we're not really prepared to take small donations yet until we're a 501c3. That'll take a little while, but going after the ideology and refocusing, anti-Zionism is the main form of the problem now. Yes, it's a form of anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism language allows too many people to say, well, that's not me, I'm an anti-Zionist, right? And so we have to say, that's just as bad. That's what we have to get. And the way to do that is to expose anti-Zionist ideology for being both bullshit and hate together. So, all right, I can stick around a little longer. If you're interested in the book, I can stick around. I can tell you a copy if you're interested. If you want to give me your email address, so you can follow what we're doing on ICSA, that would also be lovely.
Dr. Pessin, that was a fabulous presentation. I always learn so much from you. You're a wealth of information. Please sign up, give your email to get on his list. And again, I just want to plug tomorrow night. Come join us. More information at the snack table too. But I think it's important that we have a sense of community and show up, show our values and our pride for Israel and America by peacefully rallying outside this anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist event being put on at Brown University, and then also join us at our other events. And thank you so much for supporting our work. Thank you to Temple Sinai for hosting this event with us. It was very much a pleasure. And I will also share the Zoom recording to all of you as well. If you wanted to share it to a friend or family member anywhere in the world, we can keep spreading this education. So thank you, everybody. Yes, enjoy the thank you guys.
Exactly what I
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I only got to like a third of what I had.
So I can help you sell.
$15 each, yeah.
Anybody want
These are-
$15 each?
It's like a good stand-up comic, but it's one more. So, yes, I think I know the answer. You know, you're.
Oh, yeah. No, I saw it. I just, I wanted to focus. I figured, you know, it's.